Hi, I just looked up and it's high noon. So welcome to History at High Noon. It's good to see you here on a bright, sunshiny day, and if we don't get blown off the earth, we'll all have a good time today. So I welcome you to coming today. Always remember to thank the library for giving us this wonderful home and a place to have our meetings. It means a lot to us, and so give them a thanks when you think about it. Now I'm very happy to introduce Ramona Saubers to you. You all know her well, and she's doing a program that our History at High Noon has wanted to have presented for a long, long time. And so Ramona, we'll turn the microphone over to you for your visit about Father Rosen and Father Columban. Thank you.
Some of the information, the sources that I found, were on dated and undated clippings in newspaper articles and pamphlets that had accumulated over the years in a shopping bag that Phyllis Agee started, and then it went to Rita Farrell, and then it went to Joan Harmon. And so spreading it all out was somewhat like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. So there may be some discrepancies, and some of you may have information that I don't have, and I would welcome any information that you could offer. Both Father Peter Rosen and Father Columban left lasting legacies in the area. Father Rosen wasn't the first Catholic priest in the area, but he was one of the first. I'll tell you a little bit about the history leading up to that. Father Peter de Smet was a missionary to the Indians in the Black Hills in 1845, that early, and at that time the land belonged to the Indians. Father de Smet knew that there was gold in the hills, but he kept it a secret because he felt it would do harm if people found out, and it would do harm to the Indians and to the Black Hills. The Treaty of 1868 had given the Sioux Nation the lands of western South Dakota and the Black Hills, but a later treaty, and I think that was 1875, compelled the Indians to surrender most of their land in Dakota Territory. And this permitted the U.S. government to build some wagon roads in the area, 3 main wagon roads. And of course those roads then gave the explorers the opportunity to rush into the Black Hills and seek the gold. The first Catholic people in the Black Hills were French settlers from Canada. But there were many new immigrants, sufficiently large to require the needs of a priest. The first priest that was sent to the Black Hills was Father John Lonergan. And it's interesting, the Deadwood had a Black Hills Daily newspaper, and the Black Hills Daily newspaper had a clipping pasted onto it, said that Father Lonergan arrived in Deadwood in May, and then another clipping of June said that a church was already started. And then in July, the church was finished, and it was a 30 by 40 structure with 14-foot-high ceilings, and they described the view as a full view of Deadwood as it lies in the valley below, while on the other side, rich green mountains roll off to the westward, making the location extremely inviting. A September clipping from that same newspaper. Don't you think it's interesting that they had a daily newspaper in Deadwood in 1877? A September clipping indicated that a Catholic fair, and I suppose that would be like a bazaar, was held to raise funds. The raffle tickets were being sold, and the prize was either a gold watch or $100, which was the value of it. Father Lonergan was in Deadwood less than a year, and he indicated to the bishop that a major problem was a language problem. Now, I hadn't ever thought of that, but of course these immigrants came from Europe. There were Mexican workers, and there were some people who were English-speaking people. A succession of priests followed Father Lonergan. And finally, in 1882, Father Rosen, who was from the Holy Cross Fathers of Notre Dame, arrived as a pastor. Father Rosen was born in Germany in 1850. He is said to have served in the Prussian artillery. And that's another thing I found in my clippings. Many phrases like, it is said, it is recorded that, or it is stated that, without indicating where it was stated. So we just go from there. He came to America and studied at Notre Dame, and he studied the classics and philosophy. And then he went back to Europe, and he joined the Holy Cross orders in Europe, and then returned again to America after he had been ordained in Holland. Well, the Holy Cross Fathers had been called to mission to areas of the Black Hills, and so they sent Father Rosen in September of that year, just a few months after he had been ordained. Father Rosen proved himself to be a parish builder and something of a plunger in an area afflicted with many nationality issues. Although he was zealous, apparently he wasn't very good at handling finances, and he had been warned by the bishop not to incur too much debt. But he liked to beautify things, and he purchased statues and vestments and books, and consequently went into debt. He not only served the Deadwood area while he was there, but many of the outlying areas such as Central City and Lead and Terraville and Brownsville and Galena, where he built a church in 1883, and that was just a year after he had come to the Black Hills. In Galena, he had bought property, but he signed his name to the note and was indebted for the rest of his life because of a dispute between mining companies. Father Rosen had, I was going to say he had a thing for bells. I guess he liked bells, because when he built a church at Galena, he had a bell cast for that church. At the same time, he had a bell cast for St. Ambrose Church in Deadwood. And he had an inscription on both of the bells that stated, St. Ambrose Church, this was the one in Deadwood, South Dakota, Father Peter Rosen, pastor. And then he had written a poem. Among these crags and lofty peaks, my tinkling, God's love bespeaks. God is praised when the Angelus is said, here where late the Indians did tread. Well, more about the bells, because he also was serving Sturgis at the same time that he was serving St. Ambrose, and he ordered a bell for the Sturgis Church, which at that time was St. James Church. St. James was a frame church that had been built in Sturgis. And records show that after Father Rosen purchased the bell, it had to stay in the depot. It said it languished in the depot because it hadn't been paid for. And the charges were $181.35. So again, they held a fair to try to raise money for it, but the amount of the money that was due for a fence surrounding the cemetery and the bell came to $1,000, and the fair only brought $300. So that wasn't good news. However, Colonel Tilford, who was stationed at Fort Meade, was a devout Catholic, and he heard about it, and he and his wife dedicated the bell in honor of St. Joseph and St. Cordella, which were their given names. So the bells pealed in Galena and St. Ambrose Church and in Sturgis. At that time also, when the bell was dedicated, the name of St. James Church was changed to St. Aloysius. And apparently the reason why was Bishop Marty directed that it be changed to Aloysius because his first name was Alois, A-L-O-I-S. It was a little bit of vanity, I guess. While he was still at Deadwood, he sent a note to the Sturgis Weekly Record, and the Sturgis Weekly Record, and this was from July 1886, stated, The record is in receipt of a communication from Father Rosen, in which is embodied a scheme. He says, if the town will secure to him a certain piece of land lying east of and adjoining the Catholic Church, extending as far as the schoolhouse, he, representing the church, will guarantee the erection of a large and magnificent boarding school or seminary, which will remain an ornament to the city as long as the city shall exist. And the editor goes on to say, he recommends it, the editor of the paper recommends it as a building proposition, as a business proposition, thinking we can do no better than to look the matter up and canvass it. It is not known whether this matter has been mentioned by Father Rosen to anyone but this paper, but we don't want the opportunity to slip by. As it turned out, the Sturgis citizens had already indicated a desire to establish what they called a ladies' cemetery before Father Rosen's appointment. And Father Rosen then was transferred officially to Sturgis in 1886, in August of 1886. And that was a month after he had proposed the idea to the Sturgis Weekly Record. Sister Claudia de Rashner wrote a treatise for a doctoral thesis, and she titled it The Beginnings of Catholicism in South Dakota. And she described Father Rosen as a zealous priest, and she said that Sturgis was a challenge even to a zealous priest. She said, it might be said that Sturgis was conceived in sin. Scooptown was made up of camp followers and hangers-on who flocked to the vicinity of Camp Sturgis, and the most depraved and lawless members of the West are gamblers, gunmen, and scarlet women. And they found a welcome in this hotbed of iniquity. That was a very good recommendation of Sturgis. Well, Father Rosen also was a geologist, and he had discovered a sandstone quarry on the property of Judge Henry Ashe, who donated free of charge all the stone necessary for the construction. So the 3 buildings that were constructed there, the school, the dormitory, and the convent, were all constructed of that stone which had been donated by Judge Ashe. Father Rosen assumed leadership of the project and accepted bids, and the cornerstone was laid July 7th of that year. The band played. There was a big celebration in Sturgis. But unfortunately, financial problems again for Father Rosen caused a stop in the construction. And when Bishop Marty heard about it, he came out to Sturgis and he established a board of trustees from the Catholic quotation mark heads of the community. The building committee was composed of J.J. Davenport, familiar name, Max Hohen, another familiar name, and James O'Neill and Michael Godin. And the construction resumed, and in December the sisters were able to move into their new building. While Father Rosen was in Sturgis, there was an inventory taken of items in his residence. Now, nowhere could I find out where the pastor's residence was. Earlier, I guess the pastors had stayed in homes of parishioners, or they boarded, or they stayed in a hotel. But at this time, the minute said that a meeting was held at Father Rosen's residence, and these items were included in the inventory. And I thought, I'll tell you why I think it's funny. There was a washstand, a looking glass, a bedstead, a cot, mattresses, pillows, cups and saucers, 3 large spoons. And the reason I thought that was funny was that when he left, the minutes of June 1st, that would be 1990, turned over to the new priest, which was Father Chopius, I believe was the way to pronounce it. And in that inventory, it included 4 large spoons. So he made good on that. He was pastor until 1890, when he was transferred to Fairfax, Minnesota. He had resigned from the Holy Cross Fathers to become a parish priest, and he asked to be readmitted to the order, but was denied admittance because he had so many debts, and those debts would have had to be taken over by the order if he were readmitted. He died in Wisconsin in 1906, and during the time that he was in Minnesota and Wisconsin, he published a book called Pahasapa, The Black Hills of South Dakota. In that book, which was very comprehensive, and we're fortunate to have a copy of the book, the front page is titled Pahasapa, The Black Hills of South Dakota, a complete history of the gold and wonderland of the Dakotas from the remotest date to the present, comprising a full account of the original inhabitants, the whites who came in contact with them, opening up of the country for civilization, and its social and political development. So during his time in the Black Hills, apparently he had been collecting information and making notes. He said that he traveled 200 miles a week to areas such as Alkali, Bear Butte Valley, the Reed and Deadwood towns that I already told you about. And while traveling on public conveyances, which I suppose were stagecoaches, he said he had many conversations with the people who provided information for him. And he also said he had had numerous contacts with the Indians, and part of his book deals with Indian customs and cultures. He also thanked in the front part of his book the School of Mines professors for information on mining. His book is divided into 6 books. The first one is called Indians in the Black Hills. The second one, Explorers, and that included as far back as Ponce de Leon and Coronado and DeSoto. And book 3, he wrote about Father de Smet. Book 4, the Lewis and Clark Expedition. Book 5, Gold Mining and Legends, and that's a very interesting part of the book because some of it's very funny. And then in book 6, he wrote about Dakota at large, and in that section he has a description of Bear Butte and Lead and Pennington County and Fall River and most of the counties in the Black Hills. Apparently when he was writing the book in 1892, when he was in Minnesota, he had written to the editor of the Sturgis paper, who was C.C. Moody, and this is included in the section on Sturgis. This would be dated January 1st, 1893. And this is what Moody says. The Sturgis of today is vastly different from that of 10 years ago. Sturgis at this date, January 1, 1893, is a town of about 2,000 inhabitants. The place is quite well known in the Black Hills as the most prosperous of all cities, and where the money per capita is the most, daily in circulation. The water system that cost upward of $80,000 runs through its pipes the purest and best water on earth. It is the home of the largest stucco mill in the West, the only creamery in the Black Hills. It has plans for a magnificent courthouse. Schools are a source of pride. The high school building consists of 4 rooms, brick, heated by a furnace and with every convenience. And St. Martin's Academy is the leading one in the state. He concludes that Sturgis has never had a contagious disease, the pure air and water making it possible for diseases to gain a foothold. So we redeemed ourselves in the time that Sister Claudia wrote about conceived in sin. He died in Wisconsin in 1906, so he was 56 years old. And according to a history of St. Ambrose Church in Deadwood, he died impoverished. I wonder if he knows that his book sells for between $400 and $700 on the internet.
You ever can't collect the money?
What?
You can't collect the money?
No, he can't collect it. No. Okay. As I said, that some of the items were not without humor, and he has one little verse that he calls the Miner's Lament, about a gold miner. I'll see if I can remember it. About a miner staying in a mining camp. The beefsteak is of leather, the pies are made of tin, bread you cannot cut without a sword. The butter wears side whiskers, the coffee's mighty thin in that little one-hash town where I board. He has cute little things like that throughout the book. So, do you have anything to add or any questions about Father Rosen? Yeah.
Do you have any record of his?
Excuse me?
Do you have any record of his finding of parishes in Minnesota?
Can't hear it.
No, the only thing I have was from a short history of the St. Ambrose Church in Deadwood that said he went to Fairfax, Minnesota. And then he went to Wisconsin, and that's all that said, and I couldn't find anything else.
I grew up in Rosen, Minnesota, and it was named after
Oh,
Father
really?
Rosen.
Oh.
Now, I thought it was the same one, but I'm not sure.
Huh.
And I think I have some
Well,
paperwork
you
at
think it
home
might have been named after him?
Yeah, I mean, it was St. Joseph's Parish. And the town was only about 100 people ever. And it was founded around a church and a parochial school.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's real close to Millville.
Mhm.
The stone quarry that's mentioned is right up above the Sturgis sign. And that's where the stone for a lot of buildings in this community came from.
Oh, that's interesting too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the Erskine building was made of that stone also.
And the courthouse.
Yeah. And the Erskine building used to have a bell. Bells used to be much more important than they are now, because the Erskine building's bell used to ring when I was growing up at 8:30 every morning. We called it the 8:30 bell to remind people that it was time to go to school. And then the bell at St. Martin's was rung every day at 6 in the morning and at noon and at 6 at night for the Angelus. And people, you probably have seen that picture by, was it Millet or Corot? That
Millet.
picture of the Angelus where people in the fields are stopping to say the prayer.
Is it still here, or did it go to Rapid?
Pardon?
Is it still here, or did they take it to Rapid?
The bell?
Yeah.
The bells were taken to Rapid. In fact, I went down to the convent and asked them if they knew if there was an inscription on the bell there, but they didn't, and of course the bell is, not accessible, so. But the bells were taken to Rapid. Mm-hmm. I remember the bell in the chapel, and what was interesting was the bell tower was at the north end of the chapel, and the pole was at the south end in the vestibule, and an usher used to pull that so that rope or whatever it was ran the full length of the chapel ceiling, roof, whatever. Do you all remember any of the bells? Millie? Yeah.
Ramona,
Yes.
tell the funny thing about the big picture there.
Oh, a
Just how
picture
it was.
of Father Columban. Okay, we're coming to Father Columban now. The big picture here, I had told Walt that I would like to borrow a picture of Father Columban that hung in Knights of Columbus Hall, and it's, a fairly small picture. And Walt said, well, we've got a picture of him out in the garage. I said, what? He said, yeah, it's been out there for about 25 years. So he brought that picture, and I didn't know that we had it. So we'll donate that to the chapel, so.
I love that story.
Yeah, that's a good one. So now we go to Father Columban. This was a picture of Father Rosen, that's the only one I have. And then there's the big picture of Father Columban and some smaller pictures of when he was young.
I just found out my book is very valuable.
Oh, do you have Father Rosen's book? Yes. Dodie has one too.
I have one too.
I think they sell up to $700 on the internet, so they're quite rare.
Ramona, one quick thought. You know the Angelus and the bells for the Angelus. Remember when Sturgis had the fire whistle at noon and at 6? Did that play off of doing it for the Angelus?
I don't know.
It's just kind of weird.
Well, after Father Rosen left, there were 3 priests that followed him, and their names were Chopius and Umbler, and I think it was Gleason, who was a priest until 1902 and died, and I understand that they were without a priest for a while. So a new era begins with Father Columban. He came to Sturgis in 1903 to serve as chaplain to the Sisters of St. Martin's and to minister to the Catholics in the parish. He had been born in Germany, 1864, and his parents were, I smile because when I saw the names of his parents, Thomas and Mary Bregenzer, I guess I expected to see Ludwig and Helga or something like that. So Tom and Mary made me smile. Anyway, he came to America in 1887, and that was when he was 23, and he got a job as a bookkeeper for a saloon in New York, waiting to be accepted into the novitiate at the Benedictine Abbey at Conception, Missouri. He did enter that order in 1893, and he was ordained in 1900. He taught in the seminary there for 3 years, and then he was assigned to be at Sturgis. Soon after he arrived, I'm going to tell one thing about, I read in the centennial issue of the paper that Father Columban arrived on a train, and on the same train was Reverend C.D. Erskine. However, and that they had become lifelong friends and bulwarks of the community. However, I read an item about Erskine, and he arrived in 1906. So I guess that was a nice story, but it wasn't very factual. Well, soon after Father arrived in Sturgis, he and a board of consultants made the decision to replace the old parish church, and that was needed because of the growth of the congregation. Bishop Bush, there's another story about how the chapel was built. Bishop Bush donated $10,000 that had been left by his mother in the memory of his sister who had died quite young. And he donated $10,000. And so began the building of the chapel. Began on May of 1911 with Henry Brooke as supervisor of construction. And while it was under construction, or after it was constructed, the Sturgis Weekly Record reported that the church would be the finest in the state and will be completed in November, which it was, and stated that Henry Brooke could give lessons to general contractors for completing and finishing their work on time. One of the interesting things was Louis Grubel donated money for an altar, and he had remembered an altar in a church that he grew up in Germany, so he sent Father Columban to Germany to purchase this altar, and they brought it back, and I don't have a picture of that, but you probably have seen pictures of the altar, which is really a magnificent altar. The old church, St. James, remained for a while, and then it was sold to the diocese and moved to New Underwood, where it still is, and it's still in use. While he was in Sturgis, Father Columban was a very successful gardener, so the parish bought and maintained a greenhouse, and all the altar flowers were grown in the greenhouse, and that seemed to be a great source of satisfaction to him. Running expense in the ledgers of that time, there was always an item for apples and candy. As the children went through St. Martin's, and when they were due for punishment, they were often sent to Father Columban, and they usually came back smiling and smug because they had candy that Father had given them. Well, there were pleasant times and unpleasant times too. Father Columban lived through a period of Ku Klux Klan, and I'm sure that, Charles, you wrote about Father Columban's.
Yes.
Would you tell that? Would you want to tell that now?
Glad to, yes. Fortunately, as is mentioned in the article over here, the newspaper article on the right-hand side, Father Columban had established a very close relationship with C.D. Erskine, Carol D. Erskine, And,
Use the mic and turn around so people can
You bet.
hear you.
and according to the rumors, C.D. Erskine would let Father Columban know when the Klan was going to be making a raid on St. Martin's Academy. And yes, the Klan did make numerous raids on the academy. The students were trained to go under the desks when the Klan came by. On occasion, a rock would come through the window, but they had been forewarned, fortunately, by C.D. Erskine and by Father Columban. But fortunately, that relationship held firm, and the two remained friends for the rest of their lives. I'm pleased to say that these two people were probably the ones who held Sturgis together. The Klan was very strong, very powerful. A very substantial number of citizens, including deputy sheriff, a judge, numerous lawyers. You pretty well name the authorities, all members of the KKK. Fortunately, the Klan concluded by about 1928. The Great Depression certainly played a part in its demise.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Well, during his tenure in Sturgis, Father Columban was very, very much a leader in the community. He served on the Board of Education. He participated in community events. It said that he never missed an athletic event. He was a popular speaker. One of the stories is that he befriended Poker Alice in her advanced age and tended to her in her declining years and conducted her funeral in 1930. And the topic of his sermon was, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." He organized a boys' club, he organized a boys' baseball team, and he felt that if boys were busy playing, they wouldn't have time to get in trouble. He loved hiking through the hills, and I talked with Leona Brooke to see if she had some stories of Father Columban, and she said all of her brothers were altar boys, and she said they used to go on hikes with Father Columban, and always during the hike they had a break, which was called the candy break. So he was good with the candy. During his tenure here, Father Columban had many assistants. I remember Father Henry, there was Father Innocent. Father Biesendorfer from Bear Butte Valley was often called on to help. And some of you here probably remember Father Biesendorfer. But as Father Columban's age advanced, his health declined, and he had to curtail his activities. So early in 1946, he suffered a severe stroke. He was transferred to the Sisters Hospital in Hot Springs, where he died in June 20th of 1946. And there was a great deal of information about Father Columban's funeral. There was an all-night village held before his funeral, which was on June 25th, and it said a steady stream of mourners paid their respects. The businesses of Sturgis all closed. Mayor Roy Sparks proclaimed that there is a feeling of loss of one faithful resident and worker of this community who has resided and served the community for his whole life, almost. Some of the pallbearers at his funeral are names that you might recognize. Bob Regan was one, Tracy Hamlet, Eddie Lodge, Clarence Brooke, Francis Murray, Navarre Bashan. He was buried at St. Aloysius Cemetery behind the grotto, a spot where he had spent many times meditating. And to quote the Black Hills Benedictine Sisters, his life is a vibrant history of the development of the Black Hills, the Diocese of Rapid City, and the religious and cultural impetus provided by our sisters. Leona also provided me with another interesting story about Father Columban. Leona is 91 now. She said when she was 14, on her 14th birthday, she went to Father Columban's residence, his house. That used to be right at the top of we called it Courthouse Hill, where the jail is now, and it was right at the top. And she said she wanted to buy a rosary. And Father Columban said, well, I don't have money for rosaries to keep on hand. But he said, here, take mine. And he reached into his pocket and he pulled out this beautiful blue crystal rosary with a gold cross and gold chain and said, it's yours. And Leona said to this day, she treasures that, of course. Now, do you have any questions or information you can add about Father Columban? Millie?
I can remember going up to visit Father Columban, and C.D. Erskine would be there, and they'd be having a game of cribbage. And my mother, I know, she always used to make, there was a certain kind of cookies with raisins and nuts made with brown sugar, and they were Father Columban's very favorites, so she would try and send them up real often to him. But I still remember how he and C.D., these cribbage games, and they were, I mean, they were really, you know, I don't know what you would call it. They both wanted to win. Yes. And then I wanted to say that the house, my house in Whitewood was originally St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Terraville.
Really?
Yes. And the Mr. Montgomery that we bought the house from, 70-some years ago, I guess, he dismantled the church and brought it down and built our house with the lumber.
For goodness sake.
And my husband used to tell everyone, all our relatives, when they'd come and visit, he would say, this house has been blessed many times.
Thank you for that story. Yeah. Well, there's one other thing I wanted to conclude with. Well, I also went down to the convent, they call it monastery now, to ask some of the older sisters if they could tell me any stories. And one of them said, I know some stories, but I can't remember them. But another one of the sisters, it was Sister Marmion Howe, she said, when I was a novice, and that's a prelude to becoming a full-fledged nun, she said, we didn't get out very much. So she said, we like to go visit Father Columban because he always gave us candy. There's the candy again. But I'd like to conclude with an item written by Dick Williams, R.V. Williams, when Father Columban died, and he titles it A Servant Passes. The passing of Reverend Father Columban comes as a blow and a loss to this community. When a man has given his entire life for his fellow men, he has accomplished the greatest achievement that a man can hope to attain. A man who walks with God does so because he walks with his fellows. He forgets his own self and gives the richness of his soul to those about him. His life is enriched through constant service to everyone but himself. Throughout the many years that have come and gone, some good, some bad, some peaceful, some filled with war, that great man brought hope and faith to thousands. He was a beacon in a night of storms, a guiding hand to all on the rocky shore of life, a shepherd to the fold. Surely a man whose life has grown into the thousands who were about him throughout those years, and who was such a strong anchor in a community, will be missed now and always. But the work of Father Columban will live in the minds and hearts and in the deeds and services of men as years come and go, a living memorial to a great man because he was a great servant. So, thank you. I want to give credit to Jan Lamphere, who just brought this. She found it on the internet and got it yesterday. It's a pin, and it's for the president of the Sodality of Mary at St. Martin's Academy. And there used to be, we called it the Children of Mary when I was going to school. It was a society that honored the Blessed Virgin. But thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Ramona.
Yeah.